Hey everyone, welcome back to She Births Podcast. I'm your host, Brooke Wright, and today's guest is Terry. Hi, Terry.
Hi, Brooke. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for being a returning guest.
I'm happy to be here.
So can you tell our listeners what inspired you to write Winning the Game of Work?
Yeah, I left my full-time job. I've been a marketer for like 30 years, and I left the job in 2017. And when I first left, I just had a lot of thoughts about lessons that I learned that nobody ever taught me, that I kind of had to learn the hard way, or like I learned it way too late. And so I started blogging, and then, you know, somewhere along the line, somebody said, well, you've been blogging for like 2 years, you probably have enough for a book. And so at the heart of it, it really was my desire to share those really hard-won lessons that nobody ever teaches you about how to be successful and happy at work. So that's why I decided to write it.
Oh, okay. So what does it mean? What does the game of work mean to you? I could not get that out.
Yeah, you know, what it means to me is that most people walk into work thinking like, hey, I'll just show up and I'll just do my best and I'm going to get rewarded. And that is not how you get ahead in most jobs. And people go into it basically not even knowing that they're in a game, and definitely not knowing the rules of the game. So, you know, that was kind of my attempt to teach people the rules of this game that they don't even know they're playing.
Yeah, like because I feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm feeling like a little, I wouldn't say greedy or anything, but I'm feeling like if you have a degree, you should be making more than someone who, like, I wouldn't say who doesn't have a degree, but someone who is like someone who's working at a warehouse. Like, if I have a degree and they want to offer me $18 an hour, and somebody in the warehouse and doing nothing is making $20 an hour, and I'm like, what?
Yeah, I'm gonna just give me 1 second. I'm still here, but I'm just getting my dog away from the door because she keeps barking. So stop that. Sorry about that. She's not very cooperative. She doesn't understand podcasting. Well, yeah, that's the whole thing, is that there are, you know, for a lot of people that, you know, they're really smart, they're really hardworking, and they don't really realize when they get a job, a lot of times there's a lot of other smart, hardworking people there. And quite frankly, there are some people that don't work as hard, but know how to play the game. And unfortunately, a lot of times those people get ahead more so than the people that are like really doing a good job, but don't know how to play the game. And, you know, and I know a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to know, you know, I don't want to deal with the office politics and blah, 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 which I understand. It's not a good feeling. And it feels like a lot of people will use it, you know, I call them like players, you know, but if you learn how to play the game and you work hard, you're going to go a lot further. So it's, you know, I just wanted people, because there's a lot of things about the game of work that are very counterintuitive. You know, people think like, oh, if I just work hard and keep my head down, I'll get ahead. And it's like, no, people will come and use you, and they'll maybe even take credit for your work, and they'll advance, and you'll still be sitting there doing all the hard work. You know, so how do you deal with that? That's what I wanted to teach people with the book.
Yeah. So how did your corporate career shape the advice you give in the book?
Oh my gosh. Well, I tell tons of stories from my own learnings. You know, there were, I mean, everything from at my very first job, the guy who hired me got fired. He got into a disagreement with the new president of the company, and one day he got in an argument. He just like got walked out, you know. And he actually had promised me a promotion, And so, and I was like, 23 or 24 years old. And I thought, oh, well, when the new person comes in, they'll promote me. And guess what? They didn't. So that just like lessons like that, it was totally unfair. I felt like I earned that promotion, but the new person came in and they're like, I don't care what that last person promised you. I'm the new guy on the block. I can decide what I want to do. And, and I just, these were really hard lessons, right?
Yeah. So did you ever get that promotion, or did
No,
he just
I ended up quitting that job actually. I got a job waitressing during the day and doing telephone polling at night to save up enough money. I lived in Boston and I did those 2 part-time jobs to save up enough money to move back to the Washington, D.C. area where I had a lot of friends. So yeah, because he ended up hiring somebody from outside the company who only had a 2-year degree and I had a 4-year degree, and I had worked there for 2 years, put in my time, and he hired somebody from outside to come in for it was a marketing assistant role. And I was an admin, and I wanted to move up into the marketing role, and he hired somebody from outside.
He just completely overlooked you. Like, whatever.
He let me interview for it, but I felt like it was very, like, after the fact, I look back and I think it was just a formality. I don't think that he wanted to promote somebody that the previous manager had hired, and like he wanted to bring in his own people, which, that's common actually. It's not fair, but a lot of the things that happen at work aren't fair. Yeah. And, we sometimes can hurt ourselves by thinking like, oh, well, they're going to do the fair thing, and that's not always the case.
Yeah. So what personal struggles fueled your decision to shift into coaching?
I worked at the last company I was with for 12 years, and I had a few different jobs there. I'm actually, for probably 10 out of the 12 years that I was there, I really liked the company and I liked the jobs that I had. But my last couple roles, actually the last role that I had, I was basically voluntold. Like my boss told me like, oh, I'd really like you to take this job. And I said, I don't really want that job. And she was like, well, I really want you in that job. So she moved me into a job that I didn't feel like I was a good fit for. And, I kind of lost I lost a few things. I lost the feeling like the company had my best interest at heart. Mm-hmm. I didn't feel like I was very appreciated, and they didn't think I was doing a good job in that role, but I didn't have some of the things that were needed in the role. And by the way, when I moved into that role, I had another full-time job. So I did 2 full-time jobs for 2.5 years. So yeah, there's a laundry list of reasons why I kind of said, okay, what's next for me?
Man, hearing your story and hearing how you got overlooked, I've been seeing like a lot of people on Facebook and on like LinkedIn and stuff, how they think that race has an issue, like only Black people get overlooked. And I'm like, no, white people get overlooked too. And you sharing your story is just that. Like y'all get overlooked too. And I was trying to explain that to them, and they're like, no, but you sharing your story is proof.
Well, and also I will say too that like the last job that I had was, I worked in financial services for 21 years, and it is very male dominated, especially in the areas that I worked in. But the last area that I worked in was it was asset management, and it was particularly male dominated. And when I left the company, they hired a white man to replace me. And I actually think part of the issue was that they didn't feel comfortable working with a female director of marketing. But you never know. It's really hard to pin down. But like, I'll just give an example of one of the things that happened was for a long time, in the 12 years that I was at the company, I think for 8 years I had my own office, and then they started going to this, more of like a hotel type situation, where you're like, you don't get a dedicated office. And I moved onto a floor with the business that I was working for, and they actually had an empty office, but they never offered it to me. And then after I left and they brought in the new director of marketing, he got that office. So,
What?
I mean, I do feel like, there was bias,
Yeah.
but I don't think a lot of people will, I think there's a lot of blindness. Like, people don't see themselves as sexist or racist, even though their behavior is, right?
Yeah.
And so they're not going to admit it. They're going to just be, and they're going to tell themselves excuses for why they're making the decisions. But I do think in a lot of cases, it's just they don't feel comfortable with a certain type of person. And so they're going to make an excuse of why they don't want to promote that person or why they're not working closely with that person. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Man. So what's the hardest lesson you learned in your corporate journey?
Probably the most, one of the hardest ones was I had a really crazy boss at one point, and I worked for another bank, and I worked in one major city, but the head of our whole department was in Atlanta, and he would only come to our office like every couple of weeks, for like a day or two. And he hired somebody to be the director of marketing in our office, and she moved to that city from a different city, and she didn't really know banking. And I don't even know like how to begin. Like, I think I write about this in the book, but like in her first couple weeks, I was sitting in my office and I hear the screaming through the wall. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? I mean, it's just like very staid bank, right? Like everybody wears suits to work every day. And I'm listening and I can hear her. She's screaming at the dry cleaner that's in the basement of our building and swearing that they lost a pair of pants to her suit. And I'm thinking, wow, like, that's not the way to handle this, right? And anyway, so I mean, that's just my introduction to her, but she would make me give her everything that I worked on to review, but she would never give it back to me. And so all of my projects were getting behind, and so after a while I just stopped going to her, because I had been working with all of my internal business partners for a long time, and she came in and inserted herself in. And when she found out that let me step back and say, when I did go to ask her, like, where is the stuff that you were reviewing? And this is before like email attachments and stuff. She had like stacks of paper on her desk, like a foot high, and she'd start digging through her desk and she would find it, but she wouldn't have reviewed it. And so, I'm waiting a week. She hasn't reviewed it. And so that's what led me to be like, okay, I'm just not going to go to her anymore. But when she found out, she sat me down and she said, if you keep doing this, if you keep excluding me from this, I'm going to put you on a performance improvement plan, which could include me firing you. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't want to get fired. I was like the young mother with 2 kids at home. And so I thought, gosh, what am I going to do? So I just decided I'm going to have to win her over. So every morning I'd walk into the office and I would like peek my head in her office and I'd say, good morning, how are you today? And oh my gosh, that was the hardest thing for me to do. Like, I was just like gritting my teeth, like, good morning. But the weird thing is that, I mean, she had kind of like been bullying me also. Like, she was being really hard on me. And very shortly after that, all of a sudden, like, I was her best friend. And she started coming into my office and saying like, oh, I want to talk to you about this, and like bringing me under her wing and all this kind of stuff. And what I learned is that even when you've got a really bad boss, you have to respect the position. Even if you don't respect the person, you have to respect the position. And, and by the way, that whole situation with the dry cleaning, I am quite certain that those pants were probably laying on either like in the trunk of her car or in the bottom of her closet, because you heard like she couldn't keep anything straight in her office. She was losing stuff all the time. But the long and short of that is that after 10 months, she got fired. So she went on from bullying me to bullying somebody else in the department, and she did it in a way that it was very visible. And so they ended up letting her go. But I think the hardest thing was just me realizing, like, I need to take control of this. Even if I really have zero respect for this person, I have to do this to keep my job.
Man. So there's like not a process at that job to where like you could go to someone over her head and complain about her?
I did. I went to HR multiple times, and I got to a point where they said to me, don't come to us anymore. And then even the guy who was in Atlanta, that it was her boss, he was like, there's just way too much gossip and, chit chat in that office. Like, you all need to just stop it. But what I think was happening was, I think at first they were sort of ignoring it, but then I think after a while they realized, like, where there's smoke, there's fire. And when they have an HR, investigation or whatever, it takes time and it's confidential. Mm-hmm. So probably my complaints were there along with other people's complaints. And then once it got to be too much, they were like, okay, we really have to do something about it. But it was very hard thinking that they had trust in her, because nobody's going to come to you and be like, don't worry about it, we're going to fire her. Like, they can't do that. They can't, that's always confidential.
Yeah. So, man, that just reminds me of my job that I recently quit. So I had a heart attack at 37. I didn't tell you my story. So yeah, I had a heart attack at work. And when I got back, I had a heart attack. My uncle passed away. So all of that was building up that same month. And so I was at work, and I came back from the hospital, and the two team leads was like going to the boss, like filing complaints on me, like over little stuff. Like, one of the team leads, he goes to the gym a lot. So we was always talking about bulking up. And I was like, oh, you look like you've been gaining weight to bulk up. And he went to the boss and told the boss I called him fat. And I had to write a report of what I said to him. And I was like, if he wants me to apologize to him, I will, but I did not call him fat. And I was like in the office crying, because it was just complaint after complaint after complaint every day. And then when I had quit, one of the girls that was talking, crap about me, called me on my phone and was yelling at me. I was like, excuse me? And I hung up the phone on her in the middle of her yelling at me. Like, why are you calling me?
I don't work there anymore.
Yeah, why are you calling me for? And she was like, I didn't do anything to you. I was like, why the fuck are you calling me for? Excuse my language. And I said that to her and I hung up the phone. Like, don't call my phone.
Right.
But it was just a lie. I'm glad we're on this subject of work, because yeah. But I ended up quitting there, and I feel so much better. So much better.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you just kind of, and honestly, I do think, and this could have been the situation with you too, is that I think sometimes that they will start, writing you up for very minor things because they want you to quit.
Yeah, that's what they was doing. That's exactly what they was doing. And my mom was like, it kind of seems, and I was in therapy, and they was like, it kind of seems like they want to try to push you out. Like, they want you to quit, and they don't want to fire you. They want you to quit because they don't want you to file what is called unemployment. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, well, I'm just going to go ahead and quit anyway for my mental health. So
yeah. Well, I've told some people that, I do coaching, and I've told people sometimes, like, before you quit, sometimes it can make sense to go and say, like, why don't we negotiate an exit, and like have them pay a severance for you to leave, because
know that I
sometimes
could
it's
do
just
that.
easier.
Yeah, I didn't even know I could do that at all. Huh.
Well, it depends on what company, what type of company that you work with. I can tell you that, the bank that I work with, that they did that a lot, especially if people had been there for a long time, because they just didn't want anybody to be talking bad about them. And like, if they give somebody a severance package and then they have like a non-disclosure agreement that goes along with that. So if somebody was like mistreated, or if they were, if they felt like they were being bullied because of their gender or their race or their sexual orientation, or, something like that, that if, basically they're just paying them to leave and not complain or sue.
Oh, okay. Huh. So
Yeah.
what's the hardest lesson? Oh, I already asked you that. How did mentors influence the wisdom in your book?
I had very important. I mean, I've had a few mentors, but probably the most important mentor I had was my boss at the first bank that I worked at. And I don't even know how to describe it. Like, when he came in, he like basically talked to everybody in the whole department. And apparently, he told me this later, that there were some people in the department that were like talking crap about me. And he actually felt like I was one of the smartest, like, most strategic people in the department. And I didn't know that I was, right. I was just trying to do a good job. And I became sort of his right-hand person. And because of that, he would just like teach me a lot of lessons. Like, I mean, as a matter of fact, if he had to write an email to the president of the division, a lot of times he would have me come in his office and be like, okay, read this email that I wrote, and like, go ahead and edit it if you think that I should have written something a different way. So because he did that, I got like an inside view of how a senior leader interacts with the other executives. And he just, I mean, I think it was sort of like a symbiotic relationship in a lot of ways, right? Because I was sort of his strategic thought partner. And then he was teaching me about, and also I had worked there for a long time before he had. So I kind of like could tell him like who different people were and what they were like and stuff like that. But he was just teaching me, like, I don't know, basically he was teaching me the game of work, right? He was teaching me about office politics. He pointed, like, if I was in a meeting and I left the meeting, he'd like give me pointers on like, hey, you should have spoken up more, or you should have said less, or he would say to me, I'd be like, why were those two people like in that meeting acting that way? And he would be like, because they're both in competition for the next job above them. And I'd be like, oh, wow. So, I mean, he just taught me a lot. Like, basically the biggest thing I learned from him was to zoom out and look at the big picture and understand like the relationships between people, and just like look for how people interact, and also to realize that the way people are on the surface is not always what's really going on.
Yeah. Wow.
So, I mean,
I'm learning a lot.
he took the blinders off my eyes, because I was very naive before I started working for him. And I wouldn't honestly be where I am in my life and career if he hadn't mentored me.
Wow, man. So what misconceptions do people have about success at work?
Well, one of the things that I hear a lot when I'm coaching people, like, say if somebody's up for a promotion, they'll say to me like, I think I want to get promoted, but I'm really afraid to, because I'm working so hard right now that I'm afraid that when I get promoted that I'll have to work even harder and I can't work harder. And I was like, no, like, when you get promoted and you have more people under you, you actually have more control over how much you work, because all those resources, whether it's humans reporting to you, or it's budget or systems that you're in control of, you can decide how that's organized. You can decide how the work is delegated. And I think that anybody moving into a management position, the first thing that they should be doing is like looking and saying, how can I make things happen more efficiently? The big mistake that a lot of people make is they get promoted and they don't delegate enough. They're just trying to do everything themselves, and then they get burnt out. I actually had one woman that I coached a few years ago, and when I started coaching her, she was working like 70 hours a week. And one of the first things that she said to me was, I got promoted about 6 months ago, and I'm actually thinking about asking my boss to demote me. And I said, no, don't do that. Don't do that. And we worked together, and over time, she figured out, how to delegate more, how to close her door so she could get her own work done, how to build systems, how to, push more work onto her team, but not to make them work harder, but like do things like, hey, here's a template of what I want you to use for this report. Because like, for example, she had a report that she had to give to her boss, and she had a few people on the team that gave her input, and they all gave it to her in a different format. And I was like, give them the format that you want. And then, all you need to do is cut and paste,
right.
Or you could even have them do it. You could just put a document out on a shared drive, and they just go in and fill it in. You just review it and send it to your boss. So just like little things like that can make a huge difference. But a lot of times people just don't realize the power and the control that they have. But that's what your job is when you move into leadership positions, is how do we use these resources to get the most leverage out of them?
Yeah. Okay. This is the question outside of my questions. How do you get into leadership roles? Like, how do you show your boss that you could be in a leadership role? Like, how do you show them that I can do this? I can be a team lead. I can be a manager. I can be a general manager. How do you do that? Like,
well, you really start by, this is kind of a basic thing, but I'll give you more detail on it. You overperform at the level that you're at, right? So, for example, if you've got a job and it touches, somebody else's job, and maybe there's not a smooth handoff there, you work with that person to make sure that, it's a more streamlined handoff. Or if your boss is asking for a volunteer to work on a special project, you raise your hand to do that. If you've got ideas, you go to your boss to say like, hey, I had an idea about how we could do this cheaper or quicker or more efficiently. You step a little outside of your own area and start saying like, okay, where, what am I doing and how is it touching other people? And do I have ideas for how this could be done better? And once you start thinking that way, and I guess one other thing is make your boss's job easier, and that could be any number of things. It could be, volunteering to be the person that says, hey, why don't I put a template together for this report, and why don't I give it to everybody that, has to put input into the report, right? Just thinking a little bit outside the box, basically starting to think like your boss.
Yeah. Okay.
If they can rely on you more, they're going to want to give you more responsibility. And usually when you take on more responsibility, you get more pay.
Okay. I like that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your audiobook release that released in April 2025. Why did you decide to turn it into an audiobook?
Well, I had an idea to make an audiobook for the last 5 years. And I had 2 or 3 false starts. But then I got something from Amazon saying that I could actually do my audiobook with automated voices. They've got something now with an Amazon where if you've got the PDF of your book, which they do have, they've got a platform where you can choose voices and it will read your book. So I was before I was going to narrate it myself, and I did start to do it, but it's, I have to go in my closet so it would be like quiet, and it just was a big, I was dreading having to stick myself in the closet for however many hours it took me to record that. And I was able to record it with their automated voices in one day. I mean, because it's, you just click on a voice and say, this is the chapter I wanted to read.
Nice.
Yeah, it was very cool. I was so excited because it's been on my list for a long time, and it was a little hanging over my head.
Yeah, because I remember you wrote this book a while back when I interviewed you the first time, and I was like, are you going to turn it into an audiobook? And I was like waiting for it to hit audiobook.
Yes.
And I'm like, yes, finally. Because, I'm a big audiobook reader.
5 years later. Yeah. It's kind of funny. It was almost exactly 5 years.
Man. So what new audience do you hope to reach with the audiobook?
Well, I mean, it's less expensive. The audiobook is less expensive than the the paperback. I can't remember if it's probably about the same as the ebook, but I mean, I think if I'm just going by an audience of one myself, I used to be such an avid reader of, real books. But I listen to books so much more now. It's rare now that I read a book. I'd say probably 90% of, the books I read are audiobooks now, because I can do it while I'm cleaning the house or walking the dog or exercising. You can multitask with the audiobook. So I'm hoping that it's just going to be a lot of people like me that are just listening to more books.
Yeah, I'm going to get it, and I'm going to start working out and listen to your audiobook, because I need a little help with my jobs, because it seems like I have the same pattern at jobs as you did. Like, I wouldn't say I don't get along with people, or that I don't like authority. It's just that sometimes I have a hard head, and like I mouth off. Yeah. I got a mouth.
Yeah, listen, I mean, I'm a little bit of a rebel myself, and I always thought that they benefited from me being a little rebellious as much as it gave them a headache, because there's something to be said for being hard-headed, right? That means you're resilient, that you got drive, that you have confidence in yourself,
Oh yeah. So how did your coaching clients react to the audiobook release?
People have been excited about it. I mean, most people that I coach, when they find out that I had a book, a lot of them will buy the book, and they'll often come back and just say, oh, wow, I learned a few things from the book. And I mean, actually I teach a lot of the things that I talk about in the book. I mean, I really packed it full of, all of the lessons that I could even think of. I mean, a lot of people have told me, like, Terry, you should have broken that up into 3 books, because the book is 380 pages. It really should have been 3 books, not 1.
Dang. So what's one story from your book that hits harder in audio form?
I think I interviewed 11 people for the book. And actually, this is one of the things I loved about the automated voices, is they have like 30 different voices, male and female. And that was one of the things that was, that I was trying to figure out how I was going to do if I was going to narrate it myself, because I wanted to use different voices for the stories. Because the way that I told those chapters, I do like a little introduction, and then I basically say, here's what Colette had to say in her own words, right? And then it's told from their perspective. So all of those stories, I think, are awesome. I mean, that's why, these are real people that I came across, that I knew stories from their career. And so I asked to interview these people, because I thought that their careers were really inspirational. Because I think a lot of times, when you see somebody in a leadership position, you think like, oh, they found the magic escalator that just took them right to the top. But everybody that I talked to had successful careers, but some of them had gotten fired multiple times. There was one guy who was like working at Trader Joe's and, like doing these workshops. He's barely subsistence living. And then his workshop got written about in the New York Times. And then he went from like basically working at Trader Joe's and eating rice and beans to being flown to California on Google's jet to teach this storytelling workshop. So he was like totally rags to riches. Yeah, his story is his story was so fascinating. It's a two-parter.
Oh man, I can't wait to read this. Oh man. So what would you say, what advice would you give people who feel like they're stuck at work, like stuck in the same position?
Well, what I say to people is like, really start with yourself, regardless of whether you don't have a job and you're looking for a job, or you're in a job and you're like, oh, what do I do next? Start with yourself. Say to yourself, what do I like to do? And what am I good at? And then, are these things that I have an opportunity to do in my current role or in my current company? And no, you're opening up a can of worms, because I could talk about this stuff for hours. But if somebody is not happy with their current role, what I advise them is to start looking around in their own company to see if there are other opportunities within that same company, because it's a lot easier to get hired for another position in the same company than it is to jump ship and go elsewhere. Because they already know you. They already know you. And even if like you're not a perfect fit for a role, they know you well enough that they might say, oh, we'll give her a chance, but you really need to start with yourself, because a lot of people just start with like, oh, I need to work on my resume, or, how do I do and I'm like, no, figure out what it is that you want to do first, and then, and quite frankly, start networking, start talking to people. And what I tell people about that is, even if you're not sure you want to leave yet, because a lot of times, we all go through these like ups and downs at work, right? And sometimes when you're in the down thing, you're like, oh, I want to quit, or I want to look for another job. Start talking to people and just say, I'm starting to think about the next chapter of my career. You're not saying that you want to quit. You're just starting to think about the next chapter of your career. And it could be like, hey, how do you like working at your company? Or your job looks interesting. Tell me more about it. That's kind of a nice, easy way of starting to plant seeds, so that if somebody like hears of a job at their company, or, they tell you about their job and you're like, oh, I really wouldn't want to do that, or I would want to do that. It's just a good way to do it without, going to somebody and being like, hey, can you get me a job there? You just plant the seed. And sometimes people have ideas for you that you never even thought of.
Yeah, that's really great advice. I wish we would have talked sooner before I didn't want to work at the other job. Then I probably would have had like other opportunities, like, because they had job openings. I just had enough of that place.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So if someone listens to your audiobook today, what do you hope they feel when they finish?
I hope that they realize that work doesn't have to be drudgery. Like if you start with yourself, if you just really start with what do I like to do and what am I good at, and you believe that there's a place out there for you, that you can find jobs that where you can be successful and happy.
Yes.
And I have like worked with way too many people that in the beginning, they just say to me, whatever, work sucks and it's never going to get any better. And I'm like, if that's what you believe, that is going to be your experience at work. But if you know what you're good at, know what you like to do, and you go out looking for opportunities to do that, you're going to bring like joy and energy to your job. And that's possible. I think way too many people just think work has to suck, and it doesn't. I would say the majority of my career, even though I've had some ups and downs, the majority of my career, I really enjoyed it. And I worked with so many great people and did so many awesome things, because I approached it like, you know, in a positive way. And I was lucky too, because in the beginning of my career, somebody gave me the book, What Color Is Your Parachute? And said, don't even start interviewing for a job until you've done this, read this book and done all the exercises. And that book is all about what are you good at and what do you like to do.
Ooh. Okay. I'm definitely going to check that other book out. What is it called again?
What Color Is Your Parachute?
What Color Is Your Parachute? Okay, and it's like a workbook.
Yeah. It came out I think the first time in 1970, and they update it every year.
Oh.
And honestly, I feel a little bit dumb because I have recommended that book to hundreds of people. I can say that, but only recently did I even say to myself, like, why did they even call it that? And here's why they call it that, because just think about jumping out of an airplane and never even paying attention to your parachute, right? Not even saying like, what color is my parachute? Like, I am basing my life on this parachute that's going to go off when I jump out of the plane. But when we go out and look for a job, we don't even stop to be like, what do I like to do? What am I good at? Where are there opportunities for me to use these things that like make me who I am?
Yeah. Okay. Now you're gonna make me go and fix my resume now.
Well, if that comes out of this discussion, I will be very happy, because I am all about wanting people to be happier at work and really trying to instill in them this belief that it's possible. You can be happy and successful at work.
Definitely. So my last and final question before I let you go is, where all can my listeners find your book? I already know it's on audiobook now, but where at on audiobook?
Yeah, it's on Audible, it's on Amazon, it's at Barnes and Noble. I don't know, like if you Google it, and I have the Winning the Game of Work podcast, which you and I talked earlier before we hit record that I'm not making new episodes of that, but there are quite a few episodes out there if people want to listen to that podcast, because there's a lot of like words of wisdom, and I've interviewed a lot of people. I did a whole series on workplace bullying, which was really interesting. I got a lot of experts to be on my podcast to talk about workplace bullying.
Okay, I'm gonna go check that out. I want to thank you so much, Terry, for being a guest on my podcast again.
Thank you for having me, Brooke. It was great to talk to you.
You too. Have a great day.
Okay, thanks.
Bye. Hey everyone, I want to thank you all so much for listening to my interview with Terry. Definitely go check out her book. I know I am going to be checking it out and reading it tomorrow as I clean. Thank you all so much. See you next time for the next interview.